Hi, Alan.
Hey, Sean.
I am, I don't think we've met before. This is my first time coming to this working group.
And I have not been able to make it to this working group for a while. One of my team has been joining, but I wanted to make sure I could check in.
Okay, so neither of us really knows what the current state is. I'm part of the Chaos project, and we have a risk working group that focuses on some of the things that are related to security, some of the things that are really more related to licensing and dependency age. And I'm a maintainer for a tool called Augur. So after much discussion with David Wheeler, I thought I should join this meeting for a while and see what it's all about.
Excellent. I'm the guy who doesn't shut up about Sbomb.
All right. Well, you and Kate Stewart at the LF, I'm sure get along quite well.
Yes.
I ran the NTIA foundational definition piece, and now I'm at CISA, and I'm
Wow.
lead on the executive order side of things. So it's
you are the super standards person.
well, I also get to try to encourage the two data formats to play a little nicer together.
Yeah, that's always tricky when you've got multiple development teams who have no real formal connection, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna mute myself because it sounds like they're doing leaf blowing or cutting something. Can you hear that?
A little bit, yeah.
I thought you're hungry.
You know, it only starts during meetings and then it'll turn right off as soon as you're done, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's exactly. It only happens during meetings. Yesterday, the network went out on my campus and I had to just tether to my phone for 3 Zoom calls.
Well, Sean, maybe it would be good to connect out of band as well. Among the many things that I'm apparently on the hook for is helping to draft CISA's open source security strategy. And so would love to talk a little bit about how you've been approaching this problem.
Yeah, I can certainly represent the Chaos community and what we've done. Another great resource, I don't know if you've met her, is Sophia Vargas. She's at Google. She probably doesn't come to the tooling meetings, but I think she's active in a couple other OpenSSF groups. And she's been real active in our risk working group, as have I and David Wheeler and Kate Stewart. So yeah, my first meeting here, so here to learn. But yeah, if you want to connect out of band, just private message me an email, or I can do the same. Although my Zoom has this really weird issue right now where it cuts off the drop down for everyone versus a person.
Good mornings.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Chris.
Good
Alan,
morning.
I was just talking about you on a radio show. Nothing
Court
good.
Stern.
No, the cyber,
I get blamed for a lot, and sadly, over time, more of it is true.
right? The cyber show, Fred Cohn and I are doing it. They're weekly out in Silicon Valley.
We'll give everyone a minute or two. This is pretty light attendance. It amuses me that I start this meeting at 5 after, and that just means people still only show up 2 minutes after the meeting starts, no matter what time. I love it.
Well, I'm loudly on record as you know that if you had 25 minutes to do what you do in half an hour, you still get done. You know, spend 5 minutes either going to the bathroom, knowing who you're working with, do something normal like human beings.
That's right. Well, and my favorite as well is like, there's always meetings where people are like, can you stay for 2 more minutes? Like, we're not getting this done in 2 minutes. Just nope. We don't need that.
Well, I've been having a great morning. I've been drifting for 4 hours. Just while recording the show, drifted within about 5 feet of a sign I've been watching. Wondering if conditions would force me to turn a motor on.
You mean drifting in a boat?
Yes, several at the same time. Kind of do this as a
Kind of flotilla gang activity.
yes, that kind of thing. Which camera is it? This one. Yep. Yeah. So this is Sam Clemens. Mark Twain is next to it. They're both electric prototypes.
Oh,
The Florida intercoastal.
wow, I live in Missouri, so we're all about the Tom Sawyer over here.
You know, that's this. You know, that's right. But
Chris,
Yeah,
show us
so-
a few out
Alright.
the window, because I think that's going to make everyone jealous.
Yeah, yeah, we don't want to look at all that coolness.
which camera?
Okay, I need, I'm not, as much as I would love to spend an hour talking about this, Chris, like, I just need to ask you a quick question. Like, you said you're in an electric boat?
Yes. 2 electric boats.
Amazing.
Yeah. So this is Sam Clemens front deck. Mark Twain is next to it right there. 12 and 24-volt systems are all connected up. They're prototypes. We're building a real one first half of next year.
Oh my goodness. Do you have like a blog or somewhere I can read more about this?
Yeah, there's stuff out there. We haven't been, terribly Alan knows about it, because he's Alan, and I spam Facebook a whole lot, a little bit on LinkedIn. There's a website, Augutera. I'll put in the chat. It's mostly just one page right now, but there's stuff behind it we're going to turn on.
Amazing. That is so cool.
Well, it's a practical application of all the stuff we're about. It started in 2019 when I was with Unisys, got a bit of budget, started the Marine Living Research Center, Airbnb on the water makes huge money in a marina or on anchor, but it's just crazy people doing it, but making good money. So I instigated someone making a solar powered smart boat on anchor down in the Keys that makes 400% more money because it's an upscale instead of a budget hospitality thing. These boats have sailed about 1,200 miles, and the Augutera boats will be like ride vehicles. You book them for a couple of days. They will take you from spot to spot to see dolphins and things.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. All right. We got a pretty light crowd today, so that's fine. I don't mind one bit. Excuse me. We'll get cracking. So let me paste for anyone new. This is technically the OpenSSF tooling working group, but we've kind of consumed it by the Sbomb everywhere working group. So I just pasted a link to a document. If you could sign in, that is the tools working group agenda. I do this in a weird way. I don't know why. It's accidental at this point. Sign in on that document. And then the first item on this says introduce yourself in the chat. And instead of doing like formal intros, because there's usually a ton of people here, we just paste like a little intro, like I'll paste mine. I just pasted mine only to Alan. I'll paste it to everyone. Like just something like that for everyone to know who everyone else is. And like actually Sean just did that. So thank you, Sean. And then we have one item in the tooling agenda from George, and then we'll go to Sbomb everywhere, where we have a document we've been working on to kind of define some of the goals and purpose. So George, I will let you take this away.
This sounds like as if I had something prepared. So a little bit of
I would
background.
be disappointed if you did.
I have 28 slides. If I can share my screen, then that would be great. We should be done in 2 hours. No, like the background is the following. I'm in the OSPO of Ericsson, and I've been talking to various folks in the company, trying to kind of get them excited to join like the OpenSSF at large. And some of them reacted to the tooling working group, at least to the name of it. And I was wondering, but right now, as you rightfully said, the tooling working group is focusing on the Sbomb topic, and focus is good. I wanted to basically bring the question really just as a question interest check to this group, wondering if there is interest in expanding a little bit again the scope of the tooling working group in terms of talking a bit about security tooling as such. And again, Sbomb is one part of that. And that was basically it. It's an interest check from my end, not a fully flushed out proposal. I happen to know that the OpenSSF will put more focus on tooling as such. We could, like, there's so much tooling out there that there could be benefit in basically just maybe reviewing tools. There's, again, we are looking at landscapes, for instance. Maybe that's something to work on. Maybe there is a way to connect this more to the Alpha Omega project, which by itself, again, releases an Omega toolchain and so on. So nothing new that you guys are probably not yet aware of anyway. So, but again, just wanted to get a feel for that. But again, I'm wondering if, as you said, Josh, the attendance is a little bit low. It might be better to send out an email to the mailing list or to the Slack channel to get, let's say, broader feedback on that. But again, it's not a proposal to kind of get something or to change anything, but rather to facilitate or to get feedback and thoughts, perspectives on this.
Yeah.
So that was basically the whole thing I wanted to bring up here.
That's great. I mean, I'll fill everyone else in on kind of what I know and where I stand is, so this group has struggled to get any traction doing just something more broad, because that was originally the intent. And when I took it over to turn it into the Sbomb group, they were talking about like just dissolving it completely, because there were no meetings, there was no one showing up. And so what I told George on Slack yesterday is like, I would love to give this group away if someone would be willing to take it and do more with it. Because I agree with you. I think everything you said is spot on, and there's a ton of opportunity, but the challenge is just getting people to do the work. And so I think honestly, like, I'd send a mail to the list and see if you can find some maybe like-minded folks and kind of go from there, because nothing would make me happier than seeing this group thrive with a group of people interested in tools. Because obviously, yes, there's way more than Sbomb.
Are the people who look at Sbomb software in this group, and also like OSSF scorecard and OSSF best practice badges, is that all part of this tooling group, or are those separate working groups? Sorry, I'm new.
They're separate.
Okay.
There's not a lot of collaboration between working groups necessarily. There's a lot of people who go to multiple working groups, but I'd say there's not a lot of formal tissue connecting them.
Okay.
But, and Josh, just as a question on that, does the overlap in humans mean at least that there's some basic deconflict?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same.
Right.
Stoking
Same is true.
aspect.
Same is true in my world. So.
You know, I think I've said this in this working group. I know I've said it in yours, Alan's. You know, I think this is one of the big issues. You know, we need to, you know, I was just sitting here thinking I should actually just sit down and write a list. You know, I'm in most of the bloody working groups, but I don't know if anybody's actually written down the working groups, much less try to correlate them to each other. We need a map.
So there is a group, of course there's a group.
Well,
Looking on the map, Chris, the diagrammers group,
okay.
which they have a Slack channel. I don't know if they have a mailing list or anything else, but Chris Robinson runs that group. So that would be the place to start.
Yeah, there was a presentation. I think it was maybe it was on this call last week. There was somebody shared a list that was great. Can't think of who that was.
In this meeting?
It sounds familiar, but like I said, there's so many and they all seem very similar. But yeah, I think it was just last week. Female presenter. Who was it? Where was
that? Was it's in the agenda. Sbomb know-how. I forget who did it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's in the notes. but that's just the Sbomb tools for. Wait, what were you talking about? I was talking about OpenSSF working groups. Is that what you meant?
I was thinking of the supply chain working group.
I just shared a document in the chat. In the last slide, you will see more or less a map of all the working groups. It's in the slide number 101.
Wow, this would take a long time to give this presentation.
Right, that's the one I've been using internally a lot. And then people ask me, oh, this security tooling thing, that sounds interesting. What are they doing? So like, yeah, maybe let's have some conversations with other folks to see if we can do something around it. Okay, but I think that kind of covers it. I don't want to hijack this, and I guess you guys wanted to talk about the Sbomb topic. So good. Let's see if we can have more conversations around this going forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, George. I hope it works. I truly do. Okay.
It's at the very least a related topic, right? All this supply chain, working groups is a constellation that intersects with this, and same sort of thing happening in the IEEE, and how does it all connect?
Does anyone know how the IEEE keeps it together? I don't.
So there's a special technical community for cybersecurity that was started 8 years ago and faded out. John Johnson has revived that. I'm on the steering committee with some of the other folks on that. So we're trying to revive that. So,
but not even just that piece, Chris. I mean, like if you look at IEEE, they've got a lot going on.
Right. I was going to say, so I'm coming up to speed on it, but it's like this sort of page I'm looking at here, all sorts of stuff going on, all sorts of communities and threads and whatnot. And John Johnson is a long timer there. So how do we navigate the influence to connect those dots there, similar to what Alan's doing in the federal government, all across the various touch points of this supply chain topic going on.
So we just need an Alan Friedman of supply chain.
That's right.
All right.
Do more work. You really bored, I can tell. You're still cooking, right? So there's time right there.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump over to Sbomb everywhere. And while I get this all working, Alan graciously offered to kind of give an overview of everything happening at CISA for Sbomb right now. So Alan, do you want to kind of take that away?
I will try to do that as briefly and succinctly as possible. Two broad buckets inside US government that we try to firewall between. One is the government regulation side of things. So this is the executive order, which is ultimately going to require everything the US government purchases having an Sbomb, as well as coordinating across the US government, DoD, things like that, and trying to make sure that, a random Army lab doesn't reinvent this stuff. The thing that I think is more relevant is we have 5 public working groups that are focused on enhancing and refining and scaling the idea of Sbomb, right? We know that the work is actually going to be done by the community, by open source tools, by commercial tools. We want to support that. We have 5 work streams that support that. So very briefly, VEX. Everyone familiar with the idea of the vulnerability exploitability exchange? One of the worst named projects in InfoSec, but probably one of the more useful ones, right? This is the ability to share a machine readable advisory that says that your product is not affected or a project is not affected by a vulnerability. 2, on sharing and exchanging Sbombs. Chris is involved in this. This is heavy on the commercial side, but essentially there really isn't a way to move software metadata around at scale. And so, right, how do you sort of say, and especially for Sbombs, right? If you've got a commercial proprietary provider, they want to share with their customers, what does that look like? 3, and I'm going in the order of the calendar, not in any priority. 3 is on-ramps and adoption. How do we make it easier and cheaper for folks to understand and use Sbomb? They're doing things like offering procurement guidance. If you're going to buy something or sell something, how do we make it easy to integrate Sbomb into that process? 4 is cloud. Much of the discussion around how we're going to use Sbombs deals with on-prem software and users of on-prem software. Very few people have said, you know, Alan, the future of software is on-premise. And so what does this mean for a cloud environment? What do customers want? How do we deal with not impossible problems such as, right, cloud services change quickly. Some of them are harder, such as dynamic provisioning and infrastructure as code and things like that. Means that software doesn't actually exist in any real form until it's delivered. And then there's some fun issues that group is working on to saying, well, can we have service transparency? So if I'm using a service and that service uses another service, can I have visibility around that ecosystem? And the 4th one is tooling and implementation. They've been working on some of the things that this group has also been working on, including how do we integrate where in the software lifecycle the Sbomb data is captured. And they're going to be hopefully doing some work on things like a tooling taxonomy. How do we describe software tools that are relevant to Sbomb, and hopefully some plug fests as well. So that's the short overview. Anyone wants to know more, I'll paste an email in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. Cool. And just to clarify, if you can email them and ask to be added to the calendar invite, and then you get to attend the meetings and complain about Microsoft Teams, which is my favorite part. So, all right, cool. That was great. Does anyone have anything else before we get back to the document in question we've been working on?
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So, for instance, on VEX and Sbomb. So when we say Sbomb, there are a lot of competing formats here, like SPDX, there's like VEX, there is CycloneDX. What is in scope here? Are we trying to get the one format, or are we trying to make changes specifically on one of these formats?
You mean at the Sbomb Everywhere group, or are you asking Alan that question?
Maybe it's a more generic question. Like, I'm not sure what's the best way to ask the question. Like, maybe it's for Sbomb Everywhere. Maybe it's for, you know, that first group that Alan just mentioned working on VEX. Like, how is that group differing from this effort?
I think our answers are going to be the same. And it's that we have no intention of trying to pick a format or a winner, and rather it's an ecosystem, and we're all going to do our best to cooperate and empower everybody. Like the view we have in Sbomb Everywhere is we expect tools to take in CycloneDX and SPDX and to output CycloneDX and SPDX. And that is and if you don't like, that's fine too, but that's kind of the way we see it. There's no winner. Even though SPDX is part of the Linux Foundation, we don't want to pick it and say, this is what we're going to do. In fact, in the first draft of the Sbomb Everywhere group, the intent was to focus on SPDX, and I'll let you guess how that went. Like,
please spoil it.
it wasn't well accepted, right? It was obvious the Linux Foundation wanted to favor their format, and basically everyone said, no, this is ridiculous. We can't possibly say SPDX only.
Okay, this is useful for me because I was actually trying to do something similar this past couple of weeks, and our organization is more focused on the security findings, which relate to VEX. And I did find that CycloneDX, for instance, has some of these abstractions, and you can make them part of Sbomb. And I wasn't able to do this with SPDX, but it sounds like you're saying the goal of the group is really to enable the standard and just make this happen. Please go ahead.
So unfortunately, the two data formats, the leads of some of the data formats don't necessarily play well together, and there's perhaps a little too much strategic competition between them. I think one of the things that we as the community can do is say, do what you want, innovate what you want. We're interested in a core interoperability model. And if you want to add more features as a competitive thing, that's great, but we're going to focus on the basics to scale it for the entire ecosystem.
That makes a lot of sense. And then I guess that answers my question. I do have a quick follow-up. Where, as far as scope, so Vex, for instance, is usually used for, or CSAF or something like that, it's usually used for incident response, while a lot of the Sbomb things that you see in the industry are, pre-production, pre-shipping, gather the bill of materials, put it in one place. Are we trying to get a format that captures everything, like the entire SDLC, at build time, at ship time, at incident response time? There is one Sbomb format that is supposed to capture everything, or the scope is more focused and we're looking at one of these positions in the SDLC.
I can't wait to hear Alan's answer for this one.
So the fun part of Sbomb is, right, it really does affect the entire life cycle of software. No one should be making software without knowing what they have. Once you have an Sbomb, you can implement it into a lot of great use cases, compliance, vulnerability management, all sorts of fun things. What we want to do is sort of foster that. The current state of play is that Sbomb generation is necessarily well ahead of Sbomb consumption, because until recently, no one had piles of Sbomb sitting around. So why would anyone pay for a tool? Why would anyone spend time working on an open source project? That's starting to change as people are sort of realizing this. And so I think, again, what we want to do is emphasize the interoperability across the supply chain. At least that's my take on how we can do this. And then tying it back to Sbomb everywhere, one of the core challenges is we all use the same open source. And so right now, a lot of organizations are spending time trying to generate Sbombs for upstream products in a way that is not efficient and is often less than optimal from a data quality perspective.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say in addition that I've been working on research and tooling in that area, and what we try to achieve is at the end to have an Sbomb that has as much data as possible, combining the analyzed build time and other types of Sbomb. So I think this is the long-term goal, and there are gaps in producing every Sbomb type on the path, and we are working on some tooling that can generate build time and a package time, which is missing currently. The most used form is from source and post-build analysis, and there are some gaps in runtime and build time, but the final goal is to have data that's exclusive. And I think that both specs are going into a direction where they are as complete as possible, and it's long term.
Ivana, can I ask where that work is happening?
Sorry.
Like, where are you building this? Is it part of CISA or something else?
Currently, for build time and runtime, it's not something, it's something that's going to be open source, but at the moment I'm playing with some build time solutions that are in the very early proof of concept stage. So I hope that the beginning of next year we'll have something to show.
Okay, cool. That's exciting. All right, does anyone have anything else? All right, I'm going to open this document then. I'll paste it in the chat for anyone who can't find it because there's too many links and all this stuff. So this is the thing we've been working on for it's been like a month now or more, I think. But basically, the structure we have is to define the Sbomb everywhere. Like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And the group has gone through a handful of changes since its inception. And it was announced as part of a larger, I forget what they called it. The Linux Foundation had their work streams. But basically, if you look towards the bottom here, some of these requirements, I think the approach and requirements are still the old, well, some of it is, we've updated some of it, but this is kind of the original plan they had, which was very focused on generating Sbombs for open source software. And the group has discussed at length about putting effort into consumption of Sbombs, which, as Alan pointed out just a minute ago, is not something we're particularly good at yet. And we've had many discussions and thought about what we want to do and how this should all work. And basically, the group has come to the consensus that we don't expect the Sbomb Everywhere group to actually do any work. We want this group to, you laugh, it makes sense. Our intent is to spend money, like the OpenSSF has money to spend on some of this stuff. So we want to connect some of the projects with funding that might need them. Like an example is the SPDX Python library needed help. And the OpenSSF paid, I think it was like 250 grand or something to fund bringing the Python SPDX library up to snuff. So it's like a proper good library now that people can use. And there are other libraries, obviously, that have these concerns. So that's one example. And then also, we have an interest in a landscape. That's the next kind of funding thing we want to do that Kate and I started working on, and then we got busy, so we haven't touched it. But for anyone who doesn't know, the CNCF is a thing called the landscape. Go look it up. It's just a nice way to categorize various companies and tooling into what they're doing and how they work. And we think having something like that for Sbomb, not just open source Sbomb, like literally the entire Sbomb ecosystem could have value. And part of that as well is cataloging some of these groups and how they might fit together. And this kind of goes back to what Chris was saying at the beginning about the IEEE, is there's all these groups doing all this stuff and no one knows about each other. And every time we have one of these meetings, we learn about some new group or some new project. And that's problematic because you end up with people duplicating effort. And so the vision we have for Sbomb Everywhere is to kind of make it the center of mass of everything. And I say center of mass instead of center of gravity because view it as there's all this stuff orbiting around each other and there's like no central point to get a view of everything going on. And that's kind of what we want to do, is spend money and help everyone connect with everyone else, because it has become very clear that getting people to do a bunch of work just isn't going to happen, and there's already groups doing it. So why would we duplicate it? So, okay, that is my explanation. If anyone has questions or comments, just jump in. Don't worry about raising hands or anything like that. I'm going to just keep talking until someone interrupts me. But here is the current state of the document we have. We put some effort into this last week, 2 weeks ago, to kind of define everything. We're going to ignore the kind of overview at the moment, which is really just describing what an Sbomb is for the most part here. But then we get to the scope. And now I guess one other thing, if anyone wants to, just feel free to throw comments or suggestions into the document. You don't like need to ask or anything. It's pretty easy going here. So anyway, this is the scope. We hammered on this a bit, and we settled on production, distribution, and consumption of Sbomb, right? We specifically called out ecosystem because we don't want to do it. And I think this like ties into some of Alan's working groups at CISA, where there's people doing this. So we want to make sure we connect the right people to the right places. Oh, someone just asked for the link to the doc. I will paste it again.
It's a Zoom feature that the old pastes don't show up.
You know, it's funny. That's the one thing Teams does right. Like, as much as I bitch about Teams, like it totally gets the scroll back correct, where you can see everything anyone has ever typed. But
Can't have it all on every tool, I guess.
Sean, you put a comment in the chat. Can you explain this a little bit? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we have a couple of tool sets with Chaos, which is a health and sustainability metrics project that's branched out into building what we call metrics models, which are collections of metrics, but also we incorporate a number of OpenSSF tooling into the tools that we deploy as part of our project. And so I'm here because we've kind of been an aggregator of efforts like this, and I also see some definite overlap with the Chaos Risk Working Group that we've discussed, and so I'm here to sort of learn how to work with this group and how this group works. And I wanted to, since you were talking about tooling, make you aware that we've built a good deal of tooling, and some of it does leverage the tooling that different parts of OpenSSF have built.
Can
Still
I
sort
ask
of
you to
feeling it
drop a-
around for how to feel it, what to do. Sure, go ahead.
Can you drop a link to what you're working on in the agenda, the
Yeah.
Sbomb Everywhere SIG agenda?
Yeah, I sure
Cool.
will.
Thank you. Because like, again, I've never heard of Chaos before, or
It's an LF project, believe it or not.
every meeting this happens. It's infuriating and awesome because I love that there's so much work going on, but it's also like, it frustrates me sometimes because I feel like I want to find a place to figure this out, which we're working on. But all right, cool.
So Josh, and tell me if this is derailing things, but what I don't see is how do we get Sbombs everywhere? And we can even narrow down everywhere to how do we get the needed metadata into the open source supply chain so that folks who care about it can get it and use it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. We've been, yeah. I mean, so kind of some of the background there, Alan, is there's been a push by the group in the last couple of meetings to focus more, to put effort into consumption. And so that obviously, consumption is a problem for many, but obviously everywhere denotes creation as part of open source projects. And so I think that's a fair point. I'm going to add a note.
And I think even just saying what is needed, do we need like some easy, basic 8 lines of comments that we would love to see somewhere in a project? Or do we want to find a mechanism to push it and use some of that piles of money to push the stuff out there?
Yeah. And like, that's part of the intent is we don't
that might be,
Yeah. Do you have any working groups working on something comparable to this?
No, and I just got yelled at by a couple people from industry saying, why doesn't the government provide all this stuff for us in a centralized database?
Oh,
and even ignoring the idea that centralized database is a nightmare in this type of task. I do think there is some value to say this is very much a public good that we would all benefit from.
The database, or you mean every open source?
No, but you get right, the Sbomb everywhere, whether we call it a centralized database or whether we say, go to the damn repo, but still making sure that the data is, and right, it could just be something as simple as, right, the well-structured, well-defined domain model. Every package, if you're going to have Sbomb data, tuck it here.
So, yeah, this is Tracy. I don't want to be self-serving, but I think everybody should be aware that Ortelius, who's incubating at the Continuous Delivery Foundation, is focused on centralizing Sbombs. And we did get a small grant from Ripple to create an immutable Sbomb blockchain that we're working on. That would be a public chain, but we don't have the funding to create a centralized location to support that SaaS version at this point, and we haven't gotten that far. But we are working on that.
Tracy, you had me until you mentioned a very inefficient database. Leaving aside that, because I have a hunch that would take a lot of fun time debating. Could you post a link to that just so I can track it?
Sure. Yeah. And it is very inefficient. This is a lot of data, which is why we decided to look at the blockchain solution. And blockchain, believe it or not, there's ways you can make that far more efficient than a database. And I'd be happy to walk through what the architecture looks like in order to consolidate data like licenses and information that's repeated over and over and over and create that blockchain. So we've been working on this for a bit.
I'd love to get read in on all that as well, right? And which as you say, Alan, would probably take be a lively conversation right now, but maybe that's not the exact best time for it. So, but Tracy, I have to ask, at the same time this topic comes up, I think it's fundamentally impossible that there will be a centralized database. Now, will the U.S. federal government, will other governments, create databases that can be centrally used by lots of stakeholders? Yes, I mean, sure. But
well, let's put it this way. The way we're approaching it is, let's say, for example, if the Linux Foundation had a high-level domain and we could, and Kubernetes had a domain under that, every release of Kubernetes, you would see what the CVEs and the Sbombs were for Kubernetes. And you could see the history of it over time. So you would know if you ever had a vulnerability in the past. So again, it's a matter of starting to collect that information, and we're looking at doing it by pulling it from when GitHub changes. There's actually quite a few ways you can grab the information and storing it in one big massive like Mongo database. It's a lot of data.
So Tracy, can I pull that thread a little bit? So why wouldn't we expect the Kubernetes project to just host this themselves?
Where are they going to host it?
Well, I mean, they already distribute software. It's not unlike distributing software, isn't it?
Yeah, so you get software distributed, and you might get an Sbomb for each time if they're giving you an Sbomb. Keep in mind that a lot of times Sbombs are left under the hood of the DevOps pipeline. They get created, but they don't get consumed, and that's the conversation we've been having. Sure, it's a checkbox, and maybe they did create an Sbomb. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. You'd have to ask the Kubernetes team where to find their Sbombs.
Right. Well, and I mean, I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm trying to clarify this in my brain. Like, so you're talking about one centralized place to store this versus having each project host it in some meaningful way on their own.
Trying to make it easy for people to see if they have an environment. Let's say their entire environment has Kubernetes at the bottom level. They may be using some other tools in between there, and then they have all of their application level, their container Sbombs. How do they create a full view of Sbombs across their organization? Are we expecting them to go collect them, go to the Kubernetes team, find the Sbomb from there, go to these other tools, find the Sbomb from there? Or can we do something that allows them to aggregate that information up easily to say to the US government, here is what we are using, and here's what we're dependent upon, and here's a complete picture of what the dependencies are. This is what it looks like.
Yeah, go ahead.
I say that, considering a person who's been in the build space forever, that being able to aggregate it up in one big report is going to make the use of Sbombs a lot easier than asking people to go out and collect it themselves, and to collect it for every release when releases happen all day long. We're not in a monolith world anymore. We're in a microservices world. So things change on a very, very high frequency basis. Now, Kubernetes might not change, but your application level does. And we want to be able to pull all of that information up into one full report that everybody can see where the vulnerabilities are and what the Sbomb looks like. Not just for Kubernetes, but for the entire stack that an application runs on.
Well, so Sarah Evans from Dell just popped in and reminds me in the chat, right? So there's so many layers to this, right? And I think at the highest level, as I said earlier, I don't think it's even conceivable that there is going to be a repository, for the entire universe, for the entire planet, every piece of everything. But I think actors like the U.S. government, this ecosystem and so forth will do things like Tracy, you're talking about now, which is probably a good thing. I think for the working group perspective, whether it's this one or, it's CISA or whatnot, our real goal is to figure out the architecture where people can do those things. And, so Tracy, on a Sbomb, I don't know if you know about that. Love to have a side conversation about that. How we share all this and so forth is a fascinating topic. But I think from a working group perspective, we want to say, the Tracys of the world will do these things. This is fairly inevitable. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Right. Work through this, and how do we, not should you're going to. How does that work?
And would it make sense, and I don't know how the code is laid out, but would it make sense to have a core reuse?
Right.
Are you asking me?
I want to reel us back in, because I think this is a really interesting conversation, but I don't think this is the right place for it. Thanks, Alan. Thank you. I appreciate you showing up. And Alan adds a point about, for anyone, just read the chat about Sbombs and Vol data living near each other. But I want to reel us back into the document here versus Ortelius, which I think Tracy, do you have like community meetings or something people can attend? Is it on the website?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And I want to point out too, in the conversation you had before, I think that what you said was spot on, that we don't do anything, right? I know it sounds weird, but I believe if we were to take a look at all of the open source projects that are currently under the Linux Foundation that have been born since prior to the OpenSSF, there may be a good set of open source tools that's already incubating at the Linux Foundation that we should be looking at and determining if it's, potentially making recommendations or helping them go through the process of solving some of these problems. Because I haven't looked at all of these tools, but I do know that they're out there. Because the OpenSSF was sort of late to the party. A lot of tools went into the CNCF, and then when we came along, we wanted to do security stuff. We ended up in the CDF, because to this day, the OpenSSF doesn't have a way to bring in open source tooling.
Yeah, I'm here because the Augur project has tooling and metrics that are certainly related to the risks associated with security, but security is not our main focus. Risk is sort of a broader focus that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So there may be some tools out there that, this group could already begin to look at as a 2023 goal. And I think it's spot on to say that we shouldn't do anything ourselves, but we should be bringing in these tools and categorizing them in that landscape, which is going to be a tough task, but there's going to be a whole new category of, tools that are addressing security. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. All right, what do we got?
And Ortelius is just one of those, and several that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. That's good luck. That's all I'll say. Like, that's going to be, I love the idea of a central data store, but man, it is going to be a hard sell, I think. But all right. I want to jump back over here. So we've got like 5 more minutes a little more before we're out of time for this call. And every meeting I ask people to look at the document between the meetings, and they never do, which is fine. We're busy. But
is that the Sbomb everywhere document? Or which document?
Yeah, Sbomb everywhere, goals and purpose. I'll put a link again in the
no, I see the link.
Okay.
There's a couple links.
Cool.
I wasn't sure which one.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the difficulties. But this is kind of where we want to lay out what the plan is. And I guess does the approach, I'm not sure where we want to explain that we don't want to do anything. I'm going to put a note here.
Sorry,
that sounds hilarious every time I say it. I know.
Yeah.
2/3.
Sorry. I'm new, but I thought that was funny.
All right. So we've got our approach. I think Alan brought up, and I really like this, that the Sbomb everywhere aspect of this is not being addressed today. I think we got a little derailed maybe into the consumption side, which is fine, but I don't know if this group is going to solve consumption either. I think there's value in seeing open source producing good Sbombs, which there are not very many projects doing that today. Is that accurate? Does anyone disagree with the statement that most open source projects aren't creating Sbombs today?
But yeah,
I would say that's probably accurate.
Proactively, I think they're not, no.
Yeah. I mean, I know some are, but in general, I'm not
Oh.
finding these.
I think there are several open source projects that produce pretty good Sbombs.
There are some, I agree, but is it more than 1%, do you think?
Actually, there is a lot. Most of the tools that I know for open source and are used, so I don't. Yeah, I don't have much visibility on proprietary to compare, but every solution that I tried has been open source.
And they're producing Sbombs?
Yes, yeah.
Well, but I think you were referring to tools that produce Sbombs, like other libraries that produces something else and on top produces Sbomb. I know few, but in my perspective, it's very few.
Yeah, I have one of them that I'm a maintainer for, but I wouldn't put it forth as a solution to the Sbomb problem because I'm hearing a little bit of lack of coalescence around a single standard for drug generating Sbomb. So I heard earlier that SPDX is not generally accepted as the only standard for expressing the Sbomb. As an outsider, one of my curiosities would be do you have a list of the other proposals that are out there?
The other formats?
The other, like, what are the other things besides SPDX? I'd be curious to know if there's a link for that.
SWID tags, and I have seen that mostly on IoT companies.
Okay.
Those already had sometimes producing that.
Okay, thank you.
And Cyclone DX, the three that get named, and CISA calls these out actually, it's SPDX, Cyclone DX, and SWID, but no one likes SWID. So I would say SPDX and Cyclone DX are the two you'll see.
Okay.
No, because the other one, it's more about the pipelines and what happened. That's a narrative on the story of like what happened before you install, what happened after you install, what happened during all the pipelines. So that's more difficult to gather and consolidate.
For SWID, you mean?
Hmm?
For SWID, you mean? Or yeah, okay, that's fair. And I suppose that's very IoT, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, there makes total sense.
Yeah, I get it. All right. So a few more minutes. Okay, so here's what I got out of today. This was really good, actually, and I love these kind of conversations. So we know we can't do anything, and I made a note of that down in approach. We need to get open source projects building Sbombs, right? We will talk about what to do with them, I guess, later. And this is something, so you know what this reminds me of is I had a friend at the Apache Software Foundation come to me some time ago and basically said, we want to make Sbombs, how should we do it? There's no guidance telling people like you should make SPDX and Cyclone DX and do a thing with them. And I think, well, that's not true because the Maven folks were here a couple of weeks ago and they pointed out like Maven has a way they do it. And NPM now I think has a way they do it. And every ecosystem is doing it different. And so I don't know if we have, that's going to be the challenge, I guess. And that's probably something for us to think about is every open source ecosystem is going to want to do it their own way. And it's very open source. Like if we say you should do it our way, we know how that story ends, right? Like they don't, they give us a finger and then they go do it their own way, which is cool. I mean, it's open source, but that's probably something we need to think about too, is how do we define the goal, right? Because the goal is an Sbomb. The goal isn't to tell people how to do this. What else? We need more open source projects, defer to other groups, connect others. Does anyone else can you think of any high level things that we think this group needs to focus on for success?
I think this is Sarah Evans from Dell. I think one of the things we've been talking about is understanding the consumption in parallel, because as the adoption and the consumption of Sbombs evolves, that's going to be very helpful information for us to understand across our technology stack, and then also to be able to influence some of those, you know, while we're not building anything, if we're defining, if this group is defining, you know, the goals of an Sbomb, being able to have that evolve over time. This is how customers are using it. If your Sbomb doesn't provide or meet these goals, maybe you could evolve. You know, we're not going to tell you how to do, you know, your open source Sbomb, but it could evolve with what we're learning. And so one of the things that I've been talking to my company internally about is how we can get information from our customers and information from our third-party vendors, because we have pretty broad access there, to help augment the research that the foundation, the Linux Foundation, did on Sbombs with some actual use case data that we're seeing. So I'd like to offer that in parallel.
Now, can I ask Sarah, are you involved in any of the CISA working groups? Because like some of the CISA stuff overlaps with that a little bit, I think.
I do have a peer colleague who is involved in the CISA working groups, and so we're in kind of lockstep on that.
Okay. And do you think they would be more suited to such activities, or do you think this is the place for that?
It might be that they're more suited to it, and we just have awareness and visibility to how that evolves in this group, in the spirit of not creating anything new. So I'm totally flexible to that. I just know that whichever group it ends up landing in, we'd want to maintain visibility that we're trying to contribute that to understanding in general.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. All right, we're out of time, but this has been immensely valuable. I'm going to clean this document up a little bit. I'm going to see about getting my ass in gear for that landscape funding, because I think having a landscape would be very valuable to help untangle some of this. And then I guess if I would truly appreciate anyone taking a look at any of this and asking questions or adding comments or anything. If not, I guess, do we have a meeting in 2 weeks? What's 2 weeks? The 19th, 20th. I don't know. I think I'm working. We'll see. Maybe it'll just be a working session if no one shows up. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I will talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey.
You.